Alright, so this is your warm-up for your review for your CDAs today. Make sure you have your dates correct and you have the title correct. All the words that are up here you should have on your paper. You should have copied down everything, including a graph, because the graph is going to help you to remember how to find each one of these based on your responses, okay? So number one asks us, what is f of -4? So notice that the directions say use the graph to the right of this function, which is this graph over here. We're going to use this graph for number 1, 3, and 4. So we're going to use it here for number 1. We're going to use it for number 3 right here, and we're going to use it for number 4. Okay? So let's start with 1a. 1a is asking you for f of -4. Remember, when I give you the number inside the parentheses, I am giving you the x value, which means they want the y value, okay? So let's go to where x is -4. Remember, x goes side to side. So -4 for x would be here, but I'm not on that zigzag line. So I have to go up the zigzag line until I bump into a dot. So this would be the dot where x is -4. Okay, now what is the y value at this dot? 2. So there's my answer. The second example, they ask you what is the value of x if they give you that f of x equals -2. Now remember, we learned that f of x is the same thing as saying y equals -2. These two are interchangeable. Anytime you see f of x with the variable x, then I can take that whole thing out and replace it with y. So I'm going to go to where y is -2, and y is the up and down axes. So we go to where y is -2. Alright, and they ask you, what is the value of x? So I'm going to answer it as x equals what value? Remember, x goes side to side. So what is the x value at this point right here? 0. Okay? And this is a review over evaluating functions. Next, we need to review our sequences. So I've given you the sequence right here of 11, 9, 7, and 5. Remember, the ... simply means that it keeps going. Okay? So A wants you to write the explicit formula and simplify. You know, if you see it on this warm-up, that it is going to be on your CDA. So we need to figure out what our A1 is and what our D is. Since they did not ask us in A to find a specific term, then we just need to write the explicit formula and simplify it. So we're going to have A sub n equals, what is A1? A1 is the first term, which is 11. So I write 11. And my numbers are going down. So I know that instead of this being a plus sign, it's going to be a minus sign. That is, let me clean this up right quick. Alright. So I have A sub n equals 11 minus, how are these numbers decreasing? We are subtracting how many? 2. So minus 2 is my common difference, because that is what the pattern is. The pattern is -2, and we started with the first number, which is 11. Now we don't know the n because we're actually working part A right now. Okay? And we can only look at what they gave us in part A. Now let's simplify. Remember, we bring down the 11 and we will distribute the -2 to everything in the parentheses. So that will give me -2n, and then I'll distribute a -2 times a -1. 2 negatives will give me a +2. And then we need to simplify by combining our numbers. So 11 and a +2 will give me the answer of A sub n equals negative 2n plus 13, or if you write it in the opposite direction, you'll have a sub n equals 13 minus 2n. Okay, so I'm going to write that right here as my answer. A sub n equals 13 minus 2n. Now, if n is negative, they probably will write it in this order, okay? But either way, you can have this answer. Just make sure the negative is on the 2 and the 13 is positive. And when we flip it, 13 is still positive and the 2 is negative, okay? So I'm going to clean up my board because now we need to do part B. Please pause the video if you need more time. Alright, so I'm going to clean this up. Okay, so that is the simplified answer. Now we're going to find the 50th term. So that means everywhere I see an n, it's going to become the number 50. So I can write a little 50 equals 13 minus 2, and I'm copying straight from this formula. Now this n will become a 50 because we're finding the 50th term. So when we simplify this, remember you put this side in your calculator exactly as you see it. A 50 is going to equal negative 87. Okay? And this is my answer for part B. So I'm going to write it over here because I'm going to need to clear the space again to work the next couple of problems. Alright, so a 50 equals negative 87. And remember, you need to have your work. So you needed to have this step and the last step. That's the work for when I ask you for a specific term. Okay? Now let me clear this up. Moving right along. Now, number 3, they asked us to do the following. We want to identify the domain, the range, and that should be range, not wrangle. The x-axis, the x and y intercepts, and then the max and the min. Okay? So let's look at the domain. Now notice that looking at this graph, normally we would say the domain and range will be negative and positive infinity. However, this graph has a closed dot on one side and a closed dot on the other. That means this line does not continue on forever. So we need to look and see what is the smallest x value and what is the largest x value that we can have. Since these have dots that are closed on the end, we know that we're going to have braces, because braces mean I see a dot and it is filled in. Okay? Whenever we do not see a dot that is filled in, we use parentheses. Alright? So now I need the smallest x value. That's going to be the first number I write in here. And then the largest x value will go second. Okay? So we are paying attention to the x axis. So this is where we're getting our numbers from for the smallest and the largest x. So if we were to look at the x-axis, what is the smallest value of x that we have for this graph? Okay, so that would be looking on this side. Negative 4 is the furthest that this graph stretches to the left. It doesn't go any further to the left than negative 4. Okay? So we're looking at the left side. If I can get my pencil together here. Pencil. Okay. So we're looking at how far to the left does my graph go, how far this way, and then how far this way does the graph go, because that's the x-axis. So the graph doesn't continue any further past where x is negative 4. Notice that that zigzag line does not go, hold on, let me clear this up. It doesn't go any further this way than negative 4. That is as far as it goes. The zigzag line does not go to negative 5. It doesn't go to negative 6. Okay? So negative 4 is going to be the first number that's in here. That's the smallest x value that we can have. Now notice that we can have negative 3 because that's on the line. We have negative 2. We have all these values that start at negative 4. And what is the biggest x value that we can go to? Looking only at the x-axis. So you have to look at these numbers when you're giving me domain. Correct. The furthest that this graph goes is to 3. This dot right here is the dot that let me know where to stop as far as the x is, because this is the dot that is the furthest to the right. Okay, so this graph goes to the right 3. So that is going to be my biggest x value that I can have. Okay, and that's it. So it stretches to the left to negative 4. It stretches to the right to positive 3. And that's it. Now let's look at the range. So the range is how far up and down does the graph go. So we want to look at the y-axis this time. We have to use numbers that come from this line. Okay? And we're looking how far up does the graph go, how far down does the graph go. Okay? So if we look at this graph, it doesn't go any further to the up. Well, we want to start at the bottom. How far down does it go? Correct. It doesn't go any further than negative 2. Okay? You see the zigzag line does not go to negative 3. The smallest value that it goes to is negative 2. So since these are closed dots, once again, we're going to use braces. And negative 2 is the smallest number on the y-axis that my little zigzag line goes down to. Now, how high does my little zigzag line go? Well, it goes all the way up until 5. Notice the zigzag line doesn't go any further up than 5. So if I drew a line here at 5, the line wouldn't go above it. If I drew a line at negative 2, the zigzag line does not go below 2. So this is how I know where the y, the range would be. It doesn't go down any further than 2. It doesn't go any higher than 5. Alright, and we have brackets because we have a closed dot at the highest value and we have a closed dot at the lowest value. Okay, so that's why we use braces here and not parentheses. Now we need to find the x-intercept. So let me clear up my graph. It is possible that you could have more than one x-intercept. Okay, in our graph, this line hits the x-axis 2 times. One time it hits at this point, and the second time it hits at a point that is not an exact point, but it does hit the x-axis, so I have to give both of these points. Okay, so remember when you write your x-intercept, x gets the number, the other number will be 0. So if I use the easiest one, the easiest dot to identify, which is this one, that's at a whole point, the x value of this dot is at what number? 1. You see, the x value is 1. So my first intercept would be at 1, 0. Now we got to remember that we're on the negative side of the x-axis. So I'm going to go ahead and put my negative sign in there. And where would you say this dot is located at? It is between 0 and negative 1. You cannot round up, okay? Because it doesn't hit at 1, at negative 1. It hits in between there. Now I would say that is at 0.5. And that is just a guess, okay? I just rounded. Anything 0.5, negative 0.5, negative 0.6, negative 0.7, negative 0.8, or negative 0.9 would work, okay? And I just approximated that value. I know it had to be at least halfway or bigger, okay? So those are my two x values. Now let's look at the y value. So where does this zigzag line hit the y axis? Right here. So this is the y-axis, and if I trace it up and down, the only time that this zigzag line hits it is right here. So remember, when you do the y-intercept, y gets the number. So I'm going to have this point as 0 and -2. Okay? So when you give the x and the y intercepts, you have to give them as the points with the zeros in them. When it's the x-intercept, x gets the number. And notice when it hits more than one time, we write two different points. A 0 has to be in each one of them. And my y-intercept, y gets the number. So I put -2 for the y, and the other number will be 0. All right, we're almost done. Stick with me because you're going to get your study guide after this. And all of this that we're going over will be on there. So this is to refresh it, to bring it back to your memory and make sure that you remember it. Alright, the max and the min are the highest and the lowest values. You will never have a max and a min when your graph has arrows that continue in both directions. So if I look at a graph and it looks like this, and it's a line that is diagonal, okay, and it goes either diagonally to the left or it goes diagonally to the right. There has to be a slant on it. Then this one would be no max or min. But ours does not have arrows on it, notice, okay? So the maximum point would be the highest point on this graph, which means everything else is below this point. This point up here would be my maximum point. It is the highest point on my zigzag line. So what is the x and the y value at this point? So the x value is -2 and the y value is 5. So I simply write those together. The x value needs to go first and then the y value. X and then y. Okay? Now the minimum is the lowest point on the graph. In this example, we do not have a clear minimum because we have a tie. So if they ask you for the minimum of this graph, you would have to include both of these points, or you would say none. Okay? So let's write the minimum using our points. Okay? So you have to give me two separate points. What is the location or the coordinates? What's the x and the y? Okay, for this dot. The x value is 0. The y value is -2. And this is for the min. Okay? Then let's do this point because both of these are the lowest points. So this one would be the x value would be +3 and the y value is -2. Okay? And those were both the minimum. They were the lowest values of the graph. This one was the max. Alright, now we simply need to find number 4. What is the rate of change or the slope over the interval of x equals -2 and 0? So remember, this is where we write our 2 points. Since these have brackets on them and they are not parentheses, they're brackets, this is the first x number. This is the second. So I'm going to go ahead and write the x's in their points. Alright, that is x1. We're looking for y1. This will be x2 and we'll look for y2. So the second x will be 0. Alright, so both of these numbers, because they were in brackets, were x values. Well, remember, rate of change is the same thing as slope. And slope uses this formula. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So we're looking for the y value. So let's go to where x is -2. Oh man, not mean to do that. Okay, and let's make this about 100. Sorry, I don't know what happened with my graph there. So let's erase. All right, now we're looking for the y value. So let's go to where x is -2 so we can figure out what the y value is. X is -2 at this point right here. And the only point that I see on the zigzag line is this one right here. So what is the y value here? 5. Alright, now let's look where the x value is 0. Where x is 0 right here on the dot. Because this is like a number line for x, okay? So x is 0 here. The only point that has a 0 is this one. And the y value at this point is -2. So there's two ways we can do this. We can use the slope formula, or we can simply use rise over run, since we have already identified our 2 points. How many places do we have to rise? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So if we're using rise over run to find this slope or rate of change, we would have to go up 6, so that's the number on the top. Rise, of course, means to go up. Now we need to run 1, 2, but we went to the left. And every time you go to the left, that means it is negative. So my rate of change, ROC, rate of change, is -3 here. And let's do our slope, okay? So using the slope formula, let's find the slope also. So this was one way that you could find it if you like using a graph. Some people don't like using a graph. They'd rather do the work. So we're going to subtract our 2 y values on the top. So that's -2 minus 5. Alright, and then we will subtract our x values on the bottom. Did I miscount here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I did miscount. Okay, so that top number should have been 7, which means I would have had 7 over -2. So my rate of change is -7 over 2. Alright, and over here, when we subtract on the bottom, we have 0 minus -2. So when we do keep change, that becomes a positive, and we get -7 over 2 also. Okay? So 2 different ways to do the rate of change. If you like doing the graph, make sure that you're careful. Just like I had to find my mistake here. Make sure that you're careful, okay, and you're hopping one block and you're counting those blocks correctly. If you do it using the slope formula, remember, if they give you the numbers in the brackets, they're giving you x's. You have to find your y's from the graph or by plugging it in if they give you an equation, and then you can use the slope formula. So notice we got the same slope no matter which method we used. Either one of them would be correct. So now you're going to get your study guide. It looks just like your CDA again. So I highly suggest that you work with your partner to make sure that you understand what's going on. The way they word the problems on your study guide is the same way they word them on your CDA. And you will take your CDA next class, okay? So if you are even, that means you're going to take yours on the 14th. I'm sorry, 12, 13, yeah, 14. And that will be for even. And the odd classes will take theirs on the 15th. And this is for the CDA, the computer test that we always take at the end of a unit. Alright? Make sure you do your study guide and you're going to tutoring if you don't understand something, because you will be testing the next class. Thank you. Have a great day.